Hello everyone. Welcome. This is Rona Palmer from eMaint Enterprises, and I'd like to thank all of you who are logging in right now for joining us for this month's Best Practices webinar. And I'm always pleased to have back with us Joel Levitt, who's the president of Springfield Resources, and he's going to be presenting today's topic, Fundamentals of Having Great Meetings. And while we have folks logging in, let me just take a moment for those of you who haven't met Joel before at one of our sessions, or perhaps he may have worked with you a bit, but is a leading maintenance educator who's trained over 15,000 maintenance leaders from over 3,000 organizations across the globe in 20 different countries. And since 1980, he's been the president of Springfield Resources, which is a management and consulting firm that has developed solutions for clients for a host of maintenance issues. And Joel often speaks at maintenance and engineering conferences, and we were very privileged to have him as a speaker at one of eMaint's conferences. And he's written 10 popular books, and I think there's a new addition to his book line that he'll be talking about today. He's also published over 6 dozen articles on the subject. So I'm really pleased to have with us and introduce Joel Levitt. And thanks, Joel, for joining us today. And while people are logging in, I'm wondering, we had a pretty good turnout of registrants today, so obviously this is a topic that's on people's minds. And maybe you can share with us from your experience, what kind of prompted you to put this, this book together?
Well, hi, Rona. Thanks for having me. This came from years of, I've been teaching about meetings, specific kinds of meetings. And, those of you listening, we're talking about, shutdown meetings, meetings of engineering meetings for projects, and maintenance planning and scheduling meetings. And each year I added a little bit to this material and this body of knowledge, and decided that it was just about to reach critical mass, and I decided to turn it into a real book and a real program for somebody to improve their meetings.
Great. Well, I look forward to what you're going to be sharing with us, Joel, over the next 40 minutes or so. And before I turn it over to Joel in the presentation, a few quick announcements and some housekeeping items. First, I did want to let all of our attendees out there and listeners know that we are recording today's session, so your lines are muted. But we really do encourage you to type in questions in the questions feature in GoToWebinar in your control panel at any time during the presentation. And Joel has agreed to stay through the end of the hour and answer as many questions as he can. I'm also pleased to say that Joel is willing to make available to our attendees today not just a PDF of the presentation, which he will do upon request, but also 10 people from our attendee list will choose 10 names at random, and they'll receive a copy of Joel's book, 10 Minutes to Great Meetings. So we do encourage you to stay through the presentation, and at the end of the session we'll draw 10 names, share them with Joel, and he'll be following up with you to get you your signed copy of the book. There will be Q&A at the end, and but again, we do encourage you to type your questions at any time into the question box, and Joel will answer them. So again, thanks everybody for listening, and I'll turn it over to you, Joel.
Thanks very much, Rona. So what I wanted to say was this is a presentation that's based on like a program called 10 Minutes a Week to Great Meetings. And what I'm going to do is there's 10 lessons in that program, and I'm going to go over the lessons number 1 and 2 with you, exactly how I would do it in the program. So you'll really get a sense of, it's not that hard to get the first bit of improvement in your meetings. Meetings are something that are completely ubiquitous or common for everyone. We all go through it, and mostly we all complain about it. So again, this is I wrote this a short textbook and then a series of 10 simple practices. And these practices can be learned in about 10 or 15 minutes a week. And they cover all the fundamentals needed to, really run a decent meeting. They can be incorporated into any meeting, even formal or informal or ad hoc or project meetings, problem-solving meetings. And it's all very, very common sense oriented. I want to be clear about that. Those of you who have long experience, I'm hoping this will be a reminder to you because you're already doing much of this or have done it, and now we just bring it together into one piece. So this is the 2 of the 10 weekly sessions. Now, what would you do if you had a work activity at work where 91% of the people who do this activity report that they spend much of the time or some of the time daydreaming, or 96% of your people actually just miss it, like don't show up or make an excuse? How about an activity where 39% of the people report that they actually sleep during the activity, and 73% bring other work? And you do have something like this. This is one of your meetings. This is what it looks like. Hundreds and thousands of people have been asked about what they do during meetings. And I actually believe that this study was done before texting became so popular. So now, if I added texting here, how many people have texted somebody during a meeting that was not related to that meeting? And you'll get an idea of what goes on. So a survey of 1,600 business people reported that the most frustrating thing was allowing attendees to ramble, or meetings that started late or ended late or not on time. Meetings where there was no action plan created or no clear purpose to the meeting, or not organized, or meetings with no agenda, or meetings that are just plain too long. So, Rona, what I'd like to do is have people vote on which of these 5 things is their personal biggest frustration.
Okay, will do. So we're going to launch a poll, and what we're going to ask, this is where you get to voice your opinions. Please answer right into the poll using your keyboard, not in the question feature. But let us know what frustrates you most about your meetings. The answers will be shared anonymously and just in summary, so just give us your honest feedback. Is it allowing attendees to ramble? Is it that the meeting doesn't start on time or end on time? Is there no clear purpose or action plan? Is it disorganized and lacking in an agenda? Or is the meeting too long? So let's let people vote here. It looks like about 80% of you have cast your votes, so we'll leave things open for a couple more minutes till we get all the votes in. This is your chance to say, what is your biggest frustration about meetings that Joel can address in this webinar? All right. Oops, getting a couple more votes here. People are thinking, wow, we really did we had 98% in, so I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So Joel, what we saw, 32% say allowing attendees to ramble is the biggest frustration. 10% say it's not on time. 39% say no clear purpose or action plan. 7% say no agenda or not organized. And 12% say it's too long. All right,
Okay.
I'll turn it back to you.
That's great. That's great. So it looks like no action plan, I think, was the winner. Okay, so that's just interesting to know. Now, believe me, we could go on complaining about meetings. I believe that if we opened up the lines, people could tell horrendous stories about the meetings, some of the meetings they've attended. But there's one more point that I want to complain about before we start to look at the problem and deconstruct it and eventually start to solve it. Of course, there's wasted energy and wasted resources in bad meetings. But I'm going to say that probably the biggest crime of all is that people can't feel the satisfaction of making a contribution to their company and or their work group. Like the satisfaction of making a contribution is a driver for people and their motivation. And if we short circuit that feeling of satisfaction, we end up with disgruntled people, and people that they're disgruntled because they can't contribute, and that's what they really want to do, and in whatever way they do that. So that's the driver for me, is I want people to be in a position to be able to contribute their experience, their time, their energy to the successful outcome that they're trying to do with meeting. So lesson 1, we want to create and use meeting checklists. So first I want to talk about what a checklist is. I'm sure you know what it is, but I want to show you some elements of it. The second thing I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about how checklists are used in other fields, and then introduce a checklist that you could use to make meetings right off the bat work better. I was telling Ron about this before the course. This sort of ratty looking checklist is, some of you may not be old enough to remember the really hardcore Cold War days, but this is the actual checklist in a missile silo for an intercontinental ballistic missile launch. So this is what they would do. They would go down, do 1, 2, 3 before they would launch. So this is a really serious checklist. People are locked down there for 24 hours at a time, and the captain who's responsible for this actually can shoot somebody who doesn't do what they're supposed to do. So I'd say that's pretty hardcore. On a little bit lighter note, if we wanted to go to Las Vegas for some fun, we might, go to the Las Vegas websites and look at the events. We might pick some dates that, maybe either there's an event there we want to attend, or we want to avoid some of these big events. Pick airfare and hotels, and maybe get some tickets, get money, pack. We want to, of course, set our gambling limits in advance, and maybe get even more money, maybe raise those limits. And, of course, if you can cash in your plane ticket, you could buy a bus ticket and have even more money. So this would be like a Las Vegas checklist. But why would we have these checklists? What I want to do is I want you to think about your situation. And in your experience, what has happened to delay meetings? What's happened that caused meetings to be canceled? What's happened to disrupt meetings? And what if you went around your whole company and asked 10 or 20 managers to make up their own list of the answers to these questions, and you took that and made it into one list? And then you did something which we call risk management, and you look at the lists and you see which of those things can be managed, eliminated, or mitigated by some advanced action. So if it's something that could be dealt with ahead of time, then it would go on the list. If it's something that you can't really predict, like maybe you had a meeting canceled because of a fire alarm, a fire. That's not predictable. Now, fire alarms may be predictable. So we might have that as a check thing if it becomes a problem. But what we want to be doing is looking at our reality. And you know, as I've done this, I asked people what it was that's happened. And probably the most common thing is that there's still a meeting that's running late in your conference room. The second most common thing is that some element of the audiovisual system doesn't work or is gone. Computers don't work. Critical people to the meeting are not available. So the boss or the accountant or the lawyer or whoever it is, getting back to computers, you know, the presentation that you're supposed to, that this whole thing is about, wouldn't load, or you have the wrong version. We also have situations where there's not enough plugs or chairs or paper or marking pens or handouts. These should be resonating with you. It could be that the time or location was not clear, so that some people went to one place and some people went to another. It could be that the conference room, you know, looks messy and really should have been cleaned by the last people that used it. I've been in meetings where the lighting didn't work, or nobody knew what the meeting was about, no agenda. Probably one of the most common things is that people walk in the room having not done the homework that they agreed to do at the last meeting, so that people are not prepared. Now, any of these things could crash and burn your meetings, or at very least make it less effective. So what I want to do is I want to test a theory. You have a question box on your screen, and I'd like you to type in anything that's messed up or caused a delay in your meetings. And Rona, if you could just tabulate that and read them off as people send them in. We'll take 2 or 3 minutes. Just right now, I want you to start typing. Rona?
Okay. So what Joel is asking in the questions feature, if in your GoToWebinar panel, if you expand it, there's a place where you can type in your questions. So if you go ahead and just type in a few of what Joel is asking is anything that caused the meeting to get messed up or called a delay, and maybe some of you can share what that is. So I won't mention any names, but so people on the line will know, and Joel will know, what are some of the common causes for meetings to crash and burn. All right? Oh, so I see, quite a few coming through. Do you want me to just start reading them to you, Joe?
Sure, sure.
Oh, my. Okay. The person leading the meeting is late. Okay? We try to never let that happen with our webinars. Software would not work. Critical people are not available. Forgetting to send out the agenda. The key person who is needed rarely attends our planning meetings, and they're obviously important. Phone calls. Perhaps that's phone calls disrupting the meeting. Here's someone who said disruption of the meeting from the class clown. I guess everyone has one. A meeting room being double booked. Previous meetings still being in session. People coming in late. That seems to be a fairly common one. Participant takes the meeting off topic. People in the meeting receiving and accepting phone calls. The GM is never on time or he rambles. The conference room is not available. The projector can't be used on screen. The presenter is not prepared with proper information. Getting off subjects, disagreement about a discussion, and they won't talk about it later. Homework not getting done. Getting sidetracked on non-meeting topics. Not starting on time, tardy participants, not doing homework. Attendees getting off topic. Critical staff not available or called out to attend to another issue. Rambling, not staying on topic. Equipment not working. Only a couple more, Joe. I'm running out of breath. Scheduling the meeting during known facility safety drills. Interesting. Documentation from an attendee not complete. So thank you, everyone. Those are the responses.
Super.
Back to you, Joel.
Good job. Good job. So, we can see that many of these things were covered in the real world, in your real world. And what we try to do, what we were looking at, is which ones of these can we intervene in some way to eliminate. Now, some of them, you can listen to them. Some of them are, hard to get to, but other ones are not. Now, probably the biggest group of people that use these checklists is in the aircraft industry. What we're looking for are relatively short lists, 7 to 10 things that are done at one time. They cover known issues, and they create one or more meeting checklists. And just to give you a rundown here, these photographs, a friend of mine in Australia has this plane that looks like a canoe with 2 big engines on it, and he goes through a checklist every time he flies. And I got to go up with him, and I was kind of terrified because you are sitting outdoors while you're flying, but it was great fun. This is a 737 part of a checklist. You can see it's broken up into sub-lists. Before you start, if you're an originating flight, you do certain things. Before you start, if it's a through flight, you do different things. Here's how you start the engine. After you start, here's how you taxi. And you can see each stage of the process of flying has its own little checklist. Now, this is just a reproduction of it, but obviously the ones that they put in the cockpit are a little bit more elaborate than this. But you can see that 99% of your pilots will have remembered this, 99.99 probably. But we want to make sure that we don't forget to turn our landing lights on, or our transponders, or switches and stuff like that. Now, for us, I'm thinking that the checklist could be divided into 5 small lists. Remember, we want a list that you can go through in a minute or 2. We don't want something that's really takes hours to go through. The days before the meeting would be one checklist, the morning of the meeting, just before the meeting starts, during the meeting, and then after the meeting. You might have well after the meeting also as one of your one of your checklist items. So I'm envisioning, like, looking at what are the issues that have to happen days before a meeting. What are the issues that I want to be looking at the morning of the meeting? And just before, we're now going into the room in a couple minutes, that kind of thing. And every place that we can make an intervention which will make a difference in the outcome, that's what we want to put on the checklist. So here's an example. A few days before the meeting, I want to have my agenda out, and this would be something I would check off. It should have the day, the time, the location, the objective, and the topics. It may have other materials also. It may have attendance. It may have links to homework. But a few days before, and you decide this, should it be 3 days or a week before, whatever, that should happen. And then some places have a system that reminds everybody that the meeting is today, it's at 3 o'clock, and they should have X, Y, Z done. Something real short, something real to the point. If people have promised to do something, they're reminded at this point. So this would be a message the morning of the meeting, or the night before if it's a morning meeting. Now, 10 to 20 minutes before, our checklist is somebody goes to the room. Is it actually available? Is it cleaned? And then, are there enough chairs? Do the easel have paper and pens and stuff like that? Somebody flicks on the AV system and verifies connections. Somebody verifies the latest presentation graphs and make sure there's enough of them. So you can see that a lot of the problems that people talked about would have been addressed by this checklist. Now, you have to answer the question, what happens if the room is not available? Well, we're now 10 to 20 minutes before the meeting, so it's possible we can stick our head in and say, you're going to be ready in 10 minutes, right? Give them a little bit of heads up. Or it could be, maybe if it's a small meeting, we could move it somewhere and put a big sign on the door. But whatever it is, we would decide the interventions ahead of time. And then, we're beginning the meeting. If people don't already know everybody, everybody should introduce themselves and their role. It's kind of crazy to have a meeting and have somebody there that nobody knows, and nobody knows why they're there, except maybe the leader. And they're kind of sitting there, everybody's kind of wondering what it's about. So we would recommend that if there's anybody in the room that people don't know, that they're either given an opportunity to introduce themselves or they're introduced by the chair. The other thing that you can do is use the checklist to remind you to run some experiments on activities to do during the meeting to make it better. What I'm saying is, say you've got this really cool idea, and I just put an example in people come in the door with a variety of concerns and preoccupations. One is thinking about a report that's not related to this. One is thinking about their girlfriend or boyfriend at home. One is thinking about a kid that's been acting out. So people come in a variety of states. And what we want to do is we want them in one state, in other words, available for the meeting. When they come in for that period of time, that half hour, we want them to worry about the meeting and the content of that. So one practice is to start the meeting by asking if anyone has any concerns or worries that might interfere with their concentration. And it might be that somebody has to leave early or receive updates, or it could be a variety of things that you would want to do so that the people could be there. Some people, maybe because of their mental state, should not be there. Doesn't do them or the meeting any good, and that should be sorted out. Now, throughout the meeting, when you assign tasks and responsibilities, this is the beginning of the action plan, and it needs to be explicitly written down what is to be done by whom and by when. So it will come out in the minutes or the notes from the meeting, but this is usually the reason why the meeting exists, is to get these things taken care of. And at the end of the meeting, the chair might wrap up. They might give a summary of agreements or assignments, or and then review any future meeting situations. And then at the end, we might ask people, this would be, this last one is also is something we might want to try. Do people feel that the meeting achieved the objectives, and does anybody have any ideas on how to improve it? So this would be a meeting checklist. You can see it has a couple sections. You do the different sections at different times, and this solves some of the problems that we brought up before of things that ruin meetings. you design your own. Try different things. Modify it. What this is, and it's kind of hard to describe, but it's like a reminder outside of your mind. You have checklists in your mind, but this is a reminder outside your mind, because sometimes your mind is preoccupied and it misses things. And as things happen, it becomes a sum of your learnings about what's gone wrong with your meetings in the past. That checklist changes over time. And this would be the same thing with an airplane checklist. When they find new problems that happen, they modify the checklists and the inspections and stuff. Okay, lesson 2. One of the complaints that people have is, people not coming on time. And the reason for that is that there was no agreement of what the ground rules are. So every meeting needs a set of agreements. Now, in many companies, these agreements are implicit, and that you learn them by doing stuff wrong, and people, shun you or give you a hard time. But it's much more effective and much quicker to really set some rules of engagement and make sure there's explicit agreement about all aspects of the meeting. Some of this starts with just plain etiquette. Some of it is things that you should do on day one of a meeting, in other words, the first meeting of a series, and have a day one check sheet. So we want to hash out the ground rules. And, if you've ever watched kids play, they quickly realize that the rules make the game more interesting, even though they might fight about them continuously. And for our purpose, the rules make the meeting work. And without the rules, the meetings don't work. There's hundreds of possible rules. When I researched this, there was, even every country had rules that were consistent in that country. But what I want to do for us is pick the fewest rules that you can get away with, because the fewer the better in this case, and pick the ones that are consistent with the style of your organization and the meeting's mission. So we want to be, if we're in a formal organization, like a banking institution or a law firm, we might have very, very strict meeting rules. If we're doing, job planning and we're having a planners meeting, those rules might be a lot more flexible because of the style and the mission of the meeting. A good set of rules makes the meeting productive, energetic, and more fun. If the meetings become a burden, if the rules become a burden, change the rules. This is not something that you have to, it's not a sentence, it's really an agreement. And as soon as the agreement doesn't work, we don't really want to do it anymore. So let's say you have a new meeting cycle, or you have a new project. What should be the rules, to start off? Well, the first rule, pick a cool name for the group. A cool name goes a long way to make it more fun. Make sure that people share their contact information, and that's available to people so they can reach them. One of the things I see in meetings is people have been going to meetings for a long time, and they really don't know each other. And on day one of a new cycle, if it's a different group or a new group that's gotten together, I encourage people to talk a little bit about themselves, a little bit more than maybe some people would do, so we can get a sense of who they are as people. Be very clear about the reason for being or the mission and the deliverables for the meeting. We want to choose roles. We're going to have Somebody's going to facilitate or chair the meeting. Somebody's going to take minutes. Somebody's going to maybe be a scribe that's going to stand up and write stuff. We might have a timekeeper if it's one of those kind of meetings. We want to choose the ground rules appropriate to the type, size, and mission. And then when I say explicitly agree, I mean read the rules out loud and have everybody say, yes, I agree to abide by these. Some of the things we want to look at for a general set of rules. One is attendance time, like coming on time, attendance and RSVP. Some meetings people just don't show up. You don't know what's going on. You don't know why or wherefore. What do you do with phone calls? During shutdown meetings, we don't allow phone calls unless the phone call is related to the topic of the meeting. Same thing with texting. I usually tell people if they can text a yes or a no type answer, they should just probably do that. But if it requires any kind of thought, they should leave the room and do that. We also have sidebar conversations, some of them on topic and some of them off topic. What do we want to do about that? Do we want to agree not to do that? Some organizations use props like talking sticks, where the person with the stick is the one who has the floor. Food is kind of a funny thing, food and beverages. For the same meeting, if you add food and beverages, you're going to add an hour to get through the same number of agenda items. The other kind of rule that goes with that is that the more comfortable the room, the more likely it is the meeting will take a long time. So we encourage people to have uncomfortable chairs if they want short meetings, or no chairs, and that'll mean the meeting will be much shorter. What about agendas? When should they come out? What should be in the agenda format? Same thing with minutes. What's in the format? How should it look? When should it come out? Agreements about this. Homework. As everybody, everybody can agree to do their homework, and then you can still forget. But the agreement is that you do it. Participation. How are people to participate? What are they supposed to do? If there's any rules around, not being personal and not attacking people, you might say something about that. Listening. We might say something about listening. Treatment of guests. If a guest comes, how are we going to treat them? Are we going to, when they walk in, we're going to introduce them, we're going to welcome them, but by agreement. And then finally, are we going to clean up the room afterwards? And who's responsible? And make sure that that happens each time. There's other areas, but I want you to get the idea that having these discussions at the beginning of a cycle of meetings and then again as necessary helps make the meeting work. You might even want to discuss dissent and disagreements. How you're going to handle people that disagree and sometimes strongly. What about somebody that doesn't follow the ground rules that they agreed to? So remember, they've agreed to these rules, and now you have to deal with the fact that they ignore them. It could be even worse if it happens to be the boss who has agreed to the rules and then proceeds to not show up on time. Confidentiality. Some meetings have aspects which are confidential and are not supposed to be discussed outside the meeting. There should be an agreement about confidentiality if that's appropriate. Sometimes in more formal meetings you go into what's called executive session to deal with confidential issues, usually personnel type issues. Everybody knows when you're in executive session there's no observers, There's, strictly the people, and they're not supposed to talk about it. How do you deal with people who just wander and waste people's time? Or, somebody mentioned the class clown. How do you deal with the class clown? A little bit of levity is frequently appreciated, and there's a point at which it's no longer appreciated and no longer forwards the action. Dealing with impasse. Now, you might discuss this as part of your ground rules. Dealing with feedback and criticism. One of the other things is, are we going to do things by consensus or by majority? Now, consensus is when everyone agrees. Majority is obviously when a majority of people agree. So what do you do with somebody that the group has agreed under majority rules to do a certain course of action, and the person who's left doesn't agree with that? Are there any ground rules around that they may not agree, but once the group makes a decision, we would expect everyone to support the decision and not badmouth it behind the group's back? So that would be something that would be discussed ahead of time. So these are the first two lessons. The first one is determine the simple things that can mess up a meeting. Just like the list of things that we just did, and then make that list into a checkoff sheet of actions where the action can mitigate or eliminate the thing that messes up the meeting. Second thing is ground rules. Choose the rules. Have all the participants agree to abide. Like everybody says, yes, I will play by these rules. And then keep it simple. This is not complicated. Again, this is common sense. So these are the first two lessons. There's just 8 more to go. The book is available from Amazon. As we said, we're going to be sending out 10 of them to people that were listening. Also send you a code for discount for the book. And thank you for your attention. So questions, Rona?
All right, thanks, Joel.